So welcome to another episode of Conversations with Jim Penman podcast, where we talk about birth rate and the other interviews that Jim will do. And let's pick up sort of where we went off with last week, which was about now talking about poverty aspect. So you mentioned poverty just then, and you want to speak about that. So let's talk about that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, this system, this food restriction system we're interested in reproducing, one of the effects it has is on economic thinking. It makes people more hardworking, more long-term thinking. People think that, racists, for example, they look at the way the world works, and they say people in Africa are poor and people in Europe are rich. That's because they're inferior genetically. That's a racist eugenic kind of idea. So you stop people who are, genetically inferior from breeding. Now, the interesting thing about that is that humans are actually very, very similar. We're astonishingly similar genetically. Genetically speaking, people in the poorest countries on Earth, like, say, the Congo or Gabon, those kind of countries, are just the same as people in the wealthiest countries on Earth. The actual difference is epigenetic. It's not that their genes are different, it's in certain cultures because of the way they've been historically, from parents, grandparents, ancestors and so forth, certain genes are switched off when they should be on, or vice versa. So it's an epigenetic difference. Now, if we can develop a system that actually mimics the effect of food restriction, particularly in early life, what you've got is the potential to, in a sense, cure poverty. And that's, again, goes against what people think, because, okay, let's talk about what the racists think, the people are genetically inferior. Now, what other people think these days is that it's all to do with the economy, it's to do with the society, it's to do with the form of government, it's to do with the culture, it's to do with the education. The trouble with that is we haven't had much effect in changing those things either. You've still got incredibly poor countries that are not becoming wealthier, it's not actually working. Now, that's because the problem with these countries is it's not genetics, it's epigenetic, which has an effect on character. So if we can actually help people to become more, to have this food restriction effect, especially from early life, what it would do is change character in such a way is that these countries could become wealthy. They could become as wealthy as any Western country, in fact, potentially far, far wealthier, because they'd be able to think long-term, think creatively, all these sort of things. They're all epigenetic. They're not genetic at all. They're epigenetic.
And from what you know about all your research, has that ever been something that's posed as a possible solution, or is it only you proposing this sort of?
I don't know if anybody else thinks that way. The only person I know is Gregory Clark, who's an economic historian, who looked at changes in English society over the several hundred years in the 19th century, and he said people seemed to change in their attitudes. They became more long-term thinking. Rates of literacy were rising for centuries, well before universal schooling and so forth. People were more interested in becoming skilled, and you can see that because you look at the ratio of skilled to unskilled labour, and it actually reduced with time. You look at things like the investments in land and so forth, property prices and rents, and there's a whole lot of things indicate that people were becoming different. Now, Clark actually proposed that this was because there was a genetic change as a possibility. He couldn't otherwise explain it. I don't think that's right at all. I think there's an epigenetic change going on. So it's not a commonplace thinking. People in the past used to say it was genetic. People were racially inferior. People at the present say to do with the economics, with the politics. I think it's about character. And that's the thing we can actually change. And it's actually, the point about it is too, you could actually, if you understood what you're doing, you could change character, you could help countries to develop and become prosperous and peaceful and stable. And it would be incredibly cheap. It'd be a rounding error in terms of current aid. It's like a vaccination campaign, something like that, but really, really, really inexpensive. Because you're actually going into the brain, helping people. And this is purely voluntary. It's what people want to do. These treatments will become incredibly attractive once we develop them. Everybody will want them. And people in poor countries will want them too, because it will help them to be successful and prosperous and hardworking, and they'll just naturally form better governments and so forth with time.
All right, we'll leave it there today, Jim. That's a nice short episode on it as well. So make sure you join the mailing list for Birth Rate Crisis in the link to the bio as well for the book coming out later in the year. So thank you very much for your time today, Jim.